It may be argued that since Daksha was very learned, wealthy, and austere, and had descended from a very exalted heritage, how could he be unnecessarily angry towards another? The answer is that when the qualities of good education, good parentage, beauty, and sufficient wealth are misplaced in a person who is puffed up by all these possessions, they produce a very bad result. Milk is a very nice food, but when milk is touched by an envious serpent, it becomes poisonous. Similarly, material assets such as education, wealth, beauty, and good parentage are undoubtedly nice, but when they decorate persons of a malicious nature, then they act adversely. Another example given by Chanakya Pandit is that a serpent that has a jewel on its head is still fearful because it is a serpent. A serpent, by nature, is envious of other living entities, even though they be faultless. When a serpent bites another creature, it is not necessarily because the other creature is at fault. It is the habit of the serpent to bite innocent creatures. Similarly, although Daksha was qualified by many material assets, because he was proud of his possessions and because he was envious, all those qualities were polluted. It is sometimes, therefore, detrimental for a person advancing in spiritual consciousness or Krishna consciousness to possess such material assets. Kunti Devi, while offering prayers to Krishna, addressed him as Akinchana Gochara, one who is easily approached by those who are bereft of all material acquisitions. Material exhaustion is an advantage for advancement in Krishna consciousness. Although if one is conscious of his eternal relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can utilize one's material assets, such as great learning and beauty and exalted ancestry, for the service of the Lord. Then such assets become glorious. In other words, unless one is Krishna conscious, all his material possessions are zero. But when the zero is by the side of the Supreme One, it at once increases in value to 10. Unless situated by the side of the Supreme One, zero is always zero. One may add 100 zeros, but the value will still remain zero. Unless one's material assets are used in Krishna consciousness, they may play havoc and degrade the possessor. Srila Prabhupada ki Amigyanatimarandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militang Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Translation again. Although the 6 qualities, education, austerity, wealth, beauty, youth, and heritage are for the highly elevated, one who is proud of possessing them becomes blind, and thus he loses his good sense and cannot appreciate the glories of great personalities. So this verse, as soon as I read it, reminded me of Queen Kunti's prayers in the first canto of the Bhagavatam. I don't know the whole shloka, but it begins Janmaishvarya Shruta Shri B. So, in this verse there's 6 qualities, and in the verse of Queen Kunti she mentions 4. And Prabhupada, of course, in the purport, he refers to this verse as well. So no doubt the fact that I thought of it when I read the verse before I read Prabhupada's purport is of course because of Prabhupada's mercy, as it's explained that the more we read these books and associate with Srila Prabhupada, the more our intelligence is being reconstructed. Basically, Srila Prabhupada's intelligence is reconstructing our intelligence so we can begin to think like a pure devotee. So this verse, it's mentioning these exalted qualities, and Bhagavatam, it often repeats certain points. There'll be a pastime over here in the first canto, a pastime in the 7th canto, for example, and the same point is trying to be made, but the scenario might be a bit different. So, for example, here we're hearing something that was mentioned earlier on in the first canto. So, Queen Kunti, she says that one who has these things, in the word for word, there is the word mada, edamana mada. They're intoxicating. Just like, if you've got something new and fancy that you just brought, there's some kind of intoxication there. It's like, wow, I've got this new thing. So opulences can be like that. They can intoxicate one. They can basically blind one. And the perfect example of this in the Bhagavatam is Nalakuvira and Manigriva. They were very, very rich. They were in the heavenly planets. They got drunk and they were just enjoying. So they were taking advantage of their good birth and they were intoxicated by it, basically. So this is a problem because the material world basically means envy of Krishna. So as soon as we have some opulence and we're trying to enjoy it ourselves, that's more or less envy, because actually it's not ours, it actually belongs to Krishna. So whatever we have should be used in his service. So this is why Daksha got in trouble, because he had so many good qualities, but he got a little bit polluted by pride. And that's what Lord Shiva is pointing out here, as Lord Shiva is currently speaking. One who is proud of possessing them becomes blind, and thus he loses his good sense and cannot appreciate the glories of great personalities. So Queen Kunti says a similar thing. She says, you can only be easily approached by those who are materially exhausted, those who are on the path of material progress, who've got all these amazing opulences. They can't approach you with sincere feeling. So the reason they can't do that is because they're proud. Actually, I've got a lot of money. I've got, I'm pretty beautiful. I'm pretty awesome. I'm pretty learned. Why should I surrender to Krishna? Basically, that's why they can't cry out with feeling. So this is, as we know, the Vaishnava literature is always telling us how we need to become humble to approach the Lord. We can't knock on his door and say, okay, Krishna, I've decided that you can surrender to me now. I'll be merciful to you. That's not going to work. So it's the total other way around. We need to approach Krishna in a total submissive and humble mood. So also when I was reading the section here about this pride becoming a pollution of the whole body and mind, is Indra in the 10th canto in Govardhan Leela. He also got similarly proud. So in this pastime we're hearing that Daksha got proud because who does this Lord Shiva think he is? He's my son-in-law and he's not offering respects to me? What a rascal. So Indra in the Govardhan Leela, he was thinking, who do these residents of Vrindavan think they are? And this Krishna, who does he think he is? This sacrifice is meant to be for me, and now they're trying to hijack it and use it for something else, for this Govardhan Hill. What's this? So he was proud and he couldn't see clearly. Even though the residents of Vrindavan are the greatest personalities in existence. So it completely ties in with this verse here. One who is proud of possessing them becomes blind, and thus he loses his good sense and cannot appreciate the glories of great personalities. Of course, in the case of Indra, and maybe it's in the case here, I'm not fully up to date with this particular pastime, but I know in the case of Indra that Indra got blinded by Leela Shakti, you could say. Normally Indra wouldn't do such a thing, He wouldn't try to annihilate Krishna's dearest devotees and Krishna himself. That's just not a smart thing to do. So Leela Shakti was involved there, so he could do that. But still the example is there, that we may have a nice position, we may have so much opulence, and that can become a problem. if we don't remember our position, that, okay, yes, I'm up here and I've got so much responsibility, but still, compared to Krishna, I'm way down there. So as soon as we think of our position and where we are, and we forget, the bigger picture, that there's someone like 10 million miles ahead of us and up there, and his name's Krishna, as soon as we forget that, we're in trouble. So even the most powerful personality in the world, like Yudhishthira Maharaj, Parikshit Maharaj, who were ruling the whole planet, they knew who's really the boss. They knew Krishna's the boss, so they didn't have a problem. But as soon as we think like King Vena, that actually I'm the boss and everyone should surrender to me, then the Brahmanas, they weren't too happy with that and they cursed him and they killed him, because you can't have someone like that ruling the planet. Unfortunately, we don't have such awesome Brahmanas with such tejas these days, so they can't take out all the sinful leaders that are currently governing society. But that's Kali Yuga. This is the Lord's arrangement. The people born in Kali Yuga, they wanted to experience this particular flavor of material existence. But at the same time, the opportunity for the greatest mercy is there in Kali Yuga. Lord Chaitanya makes the process very easy. You just have to chant Hare Krishna. We don't have to perform thousands of years of tapasya in the Himalayas or anything like that. So this point of pride, it's you could say a foundational point of bhakti, as Srila Prabhupada mentions in chapter 13 of Bhagavad Gita in text 8 in the purport. He mentions that knowledge begins with humility. So we can't learn anything if we're not humble. So pride, you could say that's like the first thing that we have to overcome before we can actually take up the process of bhakti. We actually have to admit that maybe I don't know everything, maybe I don't know what real happiness is, maybe someone else knows better than me. So an example of pride spoiling the opulences we have, there's a nice example of Yudhishthira Maharaj and Duryodhana. And they both were very, fortunate. They were born in the the Kuru dynasty, and they were both sons of a great king. Yudhishthira was the son of Pandu, and Duryodhana Dhritarashtra, very exalted personality. They're in the same family, basically they had the same opulence, but they got different results based on their pride in Duryodhana's case and their humility based on Yudhishthira Maharaj's case. And many of you may have heard this example before, that I'm pretty sure it's Dronacharya, he asked Yudhishthira Maharaj to go and find someone in the world that was not as exalted as he, of a lesser caliber than him. And he asked Duryodhana to find someone on the planet who was more qualified than him. And so this little Leela showed the perfect example of how Yudhishthira Maharaj was the most humble person ever, because he basically went around the whole world and he couldn't find anyone more fallen than himself or more lower, less qualified, even though he's such an exalted personality. His consciousness is such that he just couldn't see that. He did find one person, if I remember the detail correctly, someone who broke a Kadashi or something. He was like, I found someone who broke a Kadashi, but then they were doing some other charity work after that, and then they're like, I got it wrong. Actually, that person's better than me. But Duryodhana, he just, I went around the whole planet and I couldn't find anyone better than me. So that's obviously not the mentality that we want if we want to make progress in devotional service. Duryodhana was also known as a chronic disease personified, born in his family to destroy it. So that's the result of pride. And Yudhishthira Maharaj, on the other hand, was Ajata Shatru. His enemy was never born. So this is the result of being humble. We don't have any enemies. And there's also an interesting point here about envy. So, as Prabhupada mentions in the purport here, milk is a very nice food, but when milk is touched by an envious serpent, it becomes poisonous. Similarly, material assets such as education, wealth, beauty, and good parentage are undoubtedly nice, but when they decorate persons of a malicious nature, then they act adversely. And then he mentions Chanakya Pandit about the serpent and having a jewel on its head. So Chanakya Pandit also says another thing. He says, Sarpa Krura Kala Krura, Sarpat Krura Tara Kala. That there are two kinds of envious animals. One is the snake, and the other is the envious man. So Chanakya Pandit says that both of them are envious, but the envious man is more dangerous than the envious snake. Why is that? Because the snake can be brought into submission by herbs and mantra. The snake charmers, they know how to do this. They chant mantras and they apply some herb, and the snake comes under subjugation. But Kala Kena Nivaryate, but the snake-like man, he cannot be subdued at any cost. So, this point being illustrated here is that an envious man, there's nothing worse than material existence, basically. And that's what Daksha is showing here, as we'll get to in the later text in this chapter. Basically, Lord Shiva points this out. One who is conducted by false ego and thus always distressed, so this is Lord Shiva talking about Daksha, who is always distressed both mentally and sensually, cannot tolerate the opulence of self-realized persons. Being unable to rise to the standard of self-realization, he envies such persons, as much as demons envy the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, it's interesting, this point, that envy is, I think, actually it was last week, Madan Gopal was mentioning how our envy, it can manifest in so many different ways towards so many different people, but actually at the root of it, it's just envy towards Krishna, ultimately, because as we know, Mamai Vangsho Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatanaha, that everyone is just a part and parcel of Krishna. So if we envy any other living entity, actually, indirectly, we're envying Krishna. It's just how it's manifesting here in this material world. So sometimes these material opulences, in this case, it was a bad thing. Some can handle opulence, but others don't seem to be able to. So some who can, as we're hearing about Yudhishthira Maharaj, he's one of those people who can. So Krishna says in the 10th canto, chapter 88, text 8, he says, if I especially favor someone, I gradually deprive him of his wealth. Then the relatives and friends of such a poverty-stricken man abandon him. In this way, he suffers one distress after another. So in other words, Krishna is saying, okay, if I can see that the material opulence that you have is preventing you from surrendering, then I'll take that away. And there's another nice example of this in the Krishna book. The kings who were captured by Jarasandha. I can't remember their prayers exactly, but in one section they basically say that actually we were puffed up being kings, This is their message that they're sending to Lord Krishna. We were puffed up by being kings, and actually it's your mercy that we've been put in this horrible condition, because in this condition we can actually realize our real position and surrender unto you. So they admit, for us, in our position, being opulent was a bad thing, and actually being deprived of it now is your mercy. So this can be a good thing in some cases, being in a decrepit position. Materially, it seems like a terrible disaster, but spiritually it can be very beneficial. For example, there's different verses about in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says, it doesn't matter what your birth is, if you're of a lower birth, then it doesn't matter, anyone can attain the supreme destination. So whether you're high birth, low birth, it's not it doesn't exclude you from taking shelter of me by having a lower birth. That's not a consideration. And then there's a verse in the Bhagavatam which says a similar things. It mentions all these sinful races. I don't even know which of these races are. Obviously they existed in previous ages, but Kirata, Huna, Andra, Pulinda, Pulakasha. And then it mentions, and even others addicted to sinful acts can be purified by taking shelter of the devotees of the Lord due to his being the supreme power. I beg to offer my respectful obeisances to him. And similarly in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Kiba Vipra Kiba Nyasi Shudra Keni Noya. Whether one is a Brahmana, sannyasi, or a Shudra, doesn't matter what he is, he can become a spiritual master if he knows the science of Krishna. So, being materially impoverished is not a disqualification, and as Queen Kunti says, actually she thinks that it's a qualification, because I've got nothing, so therefore Krishna, you're everything for me. I don't have anything of my own. So on the positive side, one may have many opulences materially. One may be very empowered, materially speaking. And so Yudhishthira Maharaj is a perfect example of how to do this properly. You've got all these amazing qualities, and you can dovetail them in Krishna's service. This is Srila Rupa Goswami's principle of Yukta Vairagya. If one rejects something that they have without knowledge of its relationship to Krishna, he is not as complete in his renunciation. So if we have some wonderful ability, some wonderful talent, some wealth, whatever it may be, and we use it in Krishna's service, then that's glorious. And on the flip side, just like Daksha, there's so many examples of what not to do. People who have so much opulence and power, etc. Hiranyakashipu, Ravana, Kamsa, all very powerful, learned, opulent, but zero. They didn't put the one in front, so no matter how many zeros you got, as Prabhupada mentions in the purport, it's 10 million zeros is still zero. So for ourselves, Krishna gives us a simple formula. Whatever we have, we must use for him. In chapter 9 of Bhagavad Gita, Yat karoshi yad ashnasi, yat jahoshi dadasi yat tapasyasi kaunteya tat kurushva mararpanam. Krishna says, whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer or give away, and whatever austerities you perform, do that, O son of Kunti, as an offering unto me. So this is the secret, just everything for Krishna, basically. Whatever you do, because we're going to do something, we're living entities, we have a desire for pleasure, we have a desire for shelter, we have so many desires, but Krishna's like, that's fine, just dovetail it with my service and it's all good. Otherwise, we can get distracted. So we have some amazing ability over here, and we're giving all this to Krishna, but we keep that amazing ability to ourselves, and we don't dovetail it in his service, then we might become distracted. As Krishna mentions in the Bhagavad Gita, as a strong wind sweeps away a boat on the water, even one of the roaming senses on which the mind focuses can carry away a man's intelligence. So, if we've got the gift of the gab and we don't use it for Krishna, then it'll get used for something else and then we'll get in trouble. So everything has to be used for Krishna. So the essence of all of this is Bhoktaram Yagyatapasam Savaloka Maheshwaram. That Krishna is the supreme enjoyer and he's the proprietor. So that's so much easier said than done. So I just said that. How much am I applying that in my own life? That's something that spiritual masters constantly on our case about, you could say, because he can see where we're at and what we can do to progress. So whatever it is, like this simple example, this is often one of the hardest examples, is this body, okay, that's Krishna's, that's Krishna's, all these other things out there, but this is my body. No, that's Krishna's too. So that's, yeah, and the desires, they're my desires. That's also faulty, actually. We can dovetail desires in Krishna's service. That's there. But ultimately, the perfect example was Maharaj Ambarish. Everything, mind, legs, words, everything. And then ultimately, it even mentions his desires. He utilizes his desires in fulfilling the desires of the Lord. So that's pretty far out. Because I know for myself, coming to Krishna consciousness, you've got so many desires. Like I remember I had one desire, it was quite funny, just a simple little desire. before I met the devotees, I liked walking a lot, like going on long walks. And then eventually somehow or other started doing book distribution. And I got to go to all these different places and do a lot of walking. And so indirectly I realized, oh, okay, I can fulfill that desire in Krishna's service. It's my desire to do all this walking, but it's being used in Krishna's service. It's not that Krishna is like, okay, now you've become a devotee, I want you to walk here and there and do like that. No, the main thing Krishna wants is our mind to become attached to him. But if we've got some desire like that and it gets fulfilled in Krishna's service, then, there's no loss. As His Holiness Devamarita Swami often points out, we should look up to karma yoga. So if we have some ability and we use it in Krishna's service, because I've got this skill, this propensity, and I want to use it for Krishna, great, fantastic. As he mentions, we need more people like that, who've got some ability, who want to use it for Krishna. And then as we progress, ultimately we reach the point of whatever Krishna wants me to do, I'll do that. That's the highest platform. So I've got another second half that I could discuss, but before I do, just open it up for any questions or comments at this point. Anyone would like to reflect, ask, add something? What's been discussed so far?
Thank you. It seems like Daksha not so aware of the way that he's behaving. I was thinking recently how it can be really easy to not be aware of your own behaviour, but to be very focused on others. So sometimes Krishna makes it clear what you need to work on, but sometimes it's not so clear, but you still have things you need to work on. So how do we become more conscious of those things which are affecting our service or relationships? Maybe.
So the question is, how do we become more conscious of what's affecting our service and relationship with others? As you started asking your question, the first thing that came to my mind was how the association of devotees, if we're in that association, then it's like having a bunch of mirrors. Because, when you're by yourself, you can't see yourself because you're in yourself. But when you've got a mirror in front of you, you're like, oh, that's what I look like. So when you're in the association of devotees, it's like, oh, okay. So in that association, generally all the things that all the good things that we've got, devotees will tell us, and they also tell us about the things that we need to work on. So that's the main thing, from my understanding, is we basically have to stay in the association of devotees, because there's one devotee, I won't mention their name, but they made a comment to His Holiness Devamarita Swami once that when they were by themselves, they realized that they were doing pretty good in their Krishna consciousness. And when they came and associated with devotees, they realized they weren't doing so well in their Krishna consciousness. So the mind can be like that. Actually, you're pretty fantastic. You're pretty good. You're doing okay. You're doing good. And then, you hang out with devotees and they realize, oh, yeah, you're doing good. At the same time, there's this little adjustment that could possibly be made, So, yeah, that's the main thing. Stay in the association of devotees, because I also heard another example. It's like a rock. It's like when we come to bhakti, we can be like a rock. And then you put all these other people who've come to bhakti, they're also rocks, and you put them all in this bag. And then you shake the bag around and you throw it down the hill, etc., etc. But what happens if rocks stay together and just rub against each other? Eventually they'll become smooth. That's one example I heard explained. So if we stay in the association of devotees, there can be some rough edges sometimes, but eventually by staying in that association we'll become smooth. We'll become free of all those rough edges. So I guess the main thing for myself, in answer to your question, in addition to what I just said just then, is asking our seniors, because everyone has their opinion and everyone's an individual, and it's not that because one person says something that differs from someone else, it's wrong. There's different angles of vision, that's there. But I guess the easiest way to initially improve is first follow the orders of the spiritual master, see what he thinks we need to work on, then the mentors, what they have to say, and then if we're even more open to constructive criticism, then we can begin to hear it from our peers as well. But especially in the beginning, that can be really hard, isn't it? It's like, yeah, that's your opinion. I remember one thing Ramdas said to me that was really nice, and it helps with this point. He said, when someone says something to you that's basically some feedback, then you don't have to accept it or reject it. So this is quite an interesting point. So someone says something to you like, when you do this, I don't, like. So you're like, it could just be their opinion. It could just be their opinion, or it might not be. So instead of accepting it, oh, yep, they're right, or rejecting it, no, what do they know? Like, just let it sit there. And then you keep going about your devotional service. And if no one else says anything of the same sort, then it might just be that person's opinion. But if someone else says the same thing, then you're like, okay, that's another person who said the same thing to me. And then another person, okay, yeah, I think that's something I've got to work on. So that's also an interesting point. When I mentioned this to Bhakti Sar, he said, that's not ordinary. That's because, materially we either accept something or reject something, but to just like kind of let it sit there, he said that's a pretty transcendental consciousness. So if you can do like that, someone gives you some feedback and you don't necessarily like it, but it might be valid. It might actually be valid. I remember one example a few years ago, it was really quite painful actually, someone said something to me and I definitely didn't like it. I thought, that's just your opinion, and that was that. And then someone else said the same thing to me on the same day. I was like, I don't want to change, And then the next morning, someone, just after I'd got out of bed, literally or something, they're just like, Prabhu, and I was like, oh my God, it was like, so 3 times within the space of a day and a half. And the final one was just how do you get out of bed in the morning? And they're just like, and at that moment I realized, man, this is so painful, but I actually have to change that habit or behavior or whatever it was. It was really getting really, Krishna's really trying to turn up the volume, do you get the point? Okay. So sometimes it could be like that, but if we're more in the mode of goodness, then it doesn't have to get to that point. But if you're in Tamagun, then someone has to get one of those loudspeakers and oi! Yeah. So, but one way also, that's also a simple way of dealing with it, is we get that feedback, we're not sure about it, we haven't got it from anyone else, present it to the mentor. So-and-so said like this, what do you think? Some truth to it, or they've just got that vision of things, that's how they see things, so don't worry about it, so bouncing it off a mentor can give us clarity as well. Yeah. Does that help? Thanks for your question. Nice question. Anyone else? Question, comment? Yes? About the, sorry? Dovetailing.
So, is there a limit to dovetailing, and what is that limit there is?
That's a good question. Yeah. Is there a limit to dovetailing, and what is that limit? So, as we understand, there's 4 regulative principles that we'll have to follow if we're trying to be a serious practitioner of Bhakti Yoga. So there are certain activities that can't be dovetailed in Krishna service, that's there. And then I've also heard it explained that you can divide it up into several categories. I think this Ramdas actually explaining this to me as well. It's like you've got certain abilities, certain talents, and you can even be super awesome at them. Like for example, Ramdas, awesome artist, awesome. But he basically kind of got told to kind of put that ability on the shelf, but now he's using that ability again. So sometimes it can be like that. We can have awesome ability that we've got, but depending on our situation and what our service is, we might not need to use that for a while, and it can just be put on the shelf, and then we can bring it out later. Or there's some things that we just can't dovetail, that have to be abandoned completely, and then there's some things that we should always dovetail. For example, if we like reading, great, you've got the best books in existence in front of you, so go for it. So there's various gradations, so that's my understanding of it. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
Similar understanding that there are things that we just have to follow, very black and white, like as you said, 4 regulative principles, like that. Then of course association with devotees, there's always like that. And usually the limit, it's revealed to you. Krishna reveals in your heart. But that's the limit, isn't it? Like externally it could be detailing, but deep in your heart that we have to create a boundary.
Right. Yeah, that's if I remember correctly in Ramdas's case as well, it's basically he was given an instruction to kind of put that ability on the shelf and then bring it back out later on. So, if we're ever in doubt, guidance. Should I dovetail this or not? Put it to the spiritual master, put it to your mentors, and then they can help. Is there anything else? Any other questions, comments? Yes?
I was just thinking about when you were talking about karma yoga and then the higher stages of bhakti when doing whatever Krishna wants, whenever Krishna wants it. And how for the devotee in the advanced stage who's doing whatever Krishna wants, whenever he wants it, what that practically looks like for him in his life. If he has certain abilities, is he then afraid? One might think that he would be afraid to do those activities because, like, if he enjoys to do that activity, then is he crossing into karma yoga?
Right.
I'm not sure if you have any thoughts around that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I'm enjoying doing this. I'm doing it for Krishna, but at the same time I'm enjoying. The process of bhakti is wonderful in that it'll purify us of that. So if we continue to engage something in Krishna's service, eventually we'll get to the point where we enjoy doing it because it pleases Krishna rather than we enjoy doing it because it pleases me. Just the natural progress of bhakti is like that. We just keep engaging. In the beginning, I like doing this, and I'm doing it for Krishna, but I like doing this. And so we keep doing that, and eventually it becomes, I like doing this, and I like doing it for Krishna. I like the fact that Krishna is happy that I'm engaged in this way, and then actually I just like Krishna. And if he wants me to do this for him, sure. If he doesn't, then okay. It'll just kind of like naturally. But we've got our certain psychophysical nature that we've got, and it seems that basically until we die, we're always going to use it in some way, shape, or form or another. For example, His Holiness Deva Mrita Maharaj, he's got his expertise in research, and he was using that at university, and he's still using it to this day. And he even mentioned, I think it was even here actually. Yeah, actually it was, and I think it was in relation to Prananath Prabhu's question. I can't even remember the question, but it was here. Anyway, he mentioned the point that you know, himself, Dave Merida Maharaj, he was saying that I could get so into all this research that's out there, you know, just like slamming material existence, showing all the flaws and all the problems, etc. I could get so into that basically you forget about your sadhana. You know? The material existence, look at all these problems. You know, you get so into researching all the issues of material existence and all the problems that you forget your sadhana. So he's saying, you know, I could do like that, you know. But so the main thing's the main thing. The main meal is the main meal. You know, the 9 processes of devotional service. But then at the same time, you could throw it away. You know, you've got that ability, and you can use it in Krishna's service, and it's very powerful in preaching. So it's, in one sense, it's kind of not a good idea to not use it, because outreach talks are very, very well researched, thought, presented, etc., etc. So to not use that in Krishna's service, you could say that's not the best thing. So just like Yudhishthira Maharaj, he didn't want to be the king of the whole planet. He didn't want to be the emperor. But Krishna's like, no, I want you to do it. kind of thing. So Krishna may want us to have opulence. He may want us to have some ability, and he may want us to use it for him. That may be there. So yeah, just by engaging in the process, naturally we'll get purified of the enjoying propensity. It's just a byproduct of the process, if we're practicing it properly. Because of course, there's the other side. Okay, karma yoga. I like doing this for Krishna, and I'm doing it for Krishna, and I'm really into that. And then we kind of start getting slack on our sadhana, and then eventually we're still doing all this stuff for Krishna that we like doing, and we actually pretty much our hearing and chanting just goes out the window. So it's good that we're still doing service for Krishna, but it's kind of not karma yoga anymore. It's becoming more like, you know, what was it, the 12th chapter of Bhagavad Gita? It's got all the different levels of devotional service. You know, the best is just always thinking of Krishna spontaneously, just doing it. And if you can't do that, then follow the regular principles of bhakti yoga. Try to develop that spontaneous attachment. But if you can't do that, then just try to work for me. But if you can't do that, you know, so, you know, you might start slipping more towards the bottom end of the scale, so we don't want that to happen. So our hearing and chanting, that always has to be central. And if we keep that as the center, then everything else will fall into place, so to speak. But as soon as this becomes the main thing, or that, rather than our hearing and chanting, then we can start to get into some problems. So as long as the hearing and chanting is at the center, chanting our rounds, reading Prabhupada's books, engaging in kirtan with the devotees, etc., worshipping the deity, so many things, the 9 processes. As long as that's in the center, then these other things, great. But if they become the primary and the hearing and chanting, etc., becomes the secondary, that's a problem. So it's just a question of prioritization. That's my understanding anyway. Any of the senior Vaishnavas have anything they'd like to add to that? Okay. Yes, Prabhu.
Thank you for the amazing class. I was just thinking, as we've been hearing this class for the last few weeks,
Sorry, I can't quite hear you.
as we've been hearing this pastime from last few weeks, the Daksha envy towards Lord Shiva. So Daksha is obviously a great personality. He's not like normal. He's a very elevated personality, but still he has envy inside his heart. And similarly, he has a lot of other pastimes like Indra has envy. So I was just thinking, what is the best way to deal the envy inside our heart? Because as a devotee, we also sometimes see like, not sometimes, a lot of the time, there's envy inside. And so what is the best way to deal the envy, or is there any way we can dovetail the envy inside us?
Dovetail the envy. Okay. Okay, so the question is, what do we do with this envy that we've got inside us, and can we dovetail it? Yeah, that kind of was the second half of the talk. Basically. Because after I'd finished going through the purport, I remember reading in the beginning of the chapter, I think it's in text 3 or something, that it basically says that Daksha tried to bypass the demigods and go straight to Vishnu. And so Prabhupada basically points out this is a problem. You can't go directly to Krishna. You've got to go through his devotees. So basically, you could say in one sense he was envious. He was like, why should I go through them? Who do they think they are? You know, I can go straight to Krishna. You know, indirectly, it's envy. But of course, Krishna doesn't accept that. Krishna wants the approach through his devotees. So in the Adi Purana, Krishna says something along the lines of, one who says he's my devotee, actually he's not my devotee. But one who says he's the devotee of my devotee, he is my devotee. So that's, just hearing of that helps with the envy, because we understand that, oh, well, this is Krishna's system and I have to submit myself to Krishna's devotee. So that's what Krishna wants. So Daksha, it's interesting. In text 9 of the chapter, he says, I don't speak out of envy. He uses those exact words. I don't speak out of envy, even though he is. And then, so this, I guess, relates to Arvind and Nab's point. Like, we may have something, you know, we may not be able to see it. Someone might give us some feedback or something, and we might think, you know, it's not a problem or something. But, so Daksha himself said, I don't speak out of envy. But anyone who's sane in the audience could see, man, this guy's envious. So, Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur said, I see this fault in you because I have it 1,000 times worse than me. So you might have heard the example, like if we've got one finger pointing at someone, there's 3 pointing back at us. But Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur is saying 1,000. So we might criticize someone, but actually we're, as His Holiness Deva Rita Maharaj said, I can see this fault in you because I'm the world's expert in that fault. So, Daksha, he's showing the demonic mentality mentioned in chapter 16 of Bhagavad Gita. You know, so much wealth do I have, I'm surrounded by aristocratic relatives, I'll perform sacrifices. You know, he's thinking just like that. Yes, envy is such a far out quality, actually. It's another example Deva Rita Maharaj gave is the second richest man in the world. This was done like maybe 10 or 11 years ago. I can't remember how long ago now, but the second richest man in the world was interviewed. And quite a bit of the interview was him expressing his envy towards the most richest man in the world. So even though you're the second richest person in the whole world, that guy who's rich, I hate him. Ugh. So this is material nature. Well, it's just such a horrible environment. So this can happen in the devotional realm. Yeah, of course. Someone's empowered. And we ourselves may be empowered. But because that person's more empowered than me, oh, god damn. It's such a far out quality envy. And it's the basic principle of material existence. So I heard something very nice recently from His Holiness Deva Rita Maharaj that can basically explain the solution to this problem. So of course we know the general principles that we hear, which is, you know, we chant Hare Krishna, 16 rounds, you know, try to chant with attention, that will clean up the heart. We perform service, especially serve the person that we're envious of. That's a really good one. That really gets it out of the system quite quickly. But we may not, I don't want to do that. My relationship with that person's not so good, I don't know, you know. Maybe issues with that. But a recent one I heard from His Holiness Deva Rita Maharaj, which was really nice, was just read Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's the best example of how to get over envy. Watch the devotees' dealings. And so it just so happens that I was just reading a section in Chaitanya Charitamrita where Rupa and Sanatana Goswami, they approach the Lord. And at the end of the exchange, or towards the end of the exchange, Lord Chaitanya, he gives an instruction to Rupa and Sanatana Goswami to basically touch the feet of everyone in the room, get their mercy. And he instructs the devotees for them to give them Rupa and Sanatana Goswami. He instructs the devotees in the audience to give Rupa and Sanatana Goswami their mercy. And Prabhupada takes the opportunity in that purport, he really hammers home the point that basically we shouldn't be envious. So a Vaishnava is joyful by nature to see that others progressing. So we can practice this. You know, if someone does something far out, just let it come out on our tongue and just go, man, that was amazing, just immediately, you know. And because if you don't, you know, subtly, slowly, sometimes it can like, what, you know, I want some recognition here, you know, like, but if you just immediately just blurt it out, wow, that was amazing, bro, far out, that was an awesome kirtan, I've never seen such a kirtan before, you're like, immediately, there's no chance for like the envy to even manifest, you've like just, so envy is just indirect appreciation, so as Dave Marita Maharaj often says, just directly appreciate, just far out, man, you're an amazing cook. That's such far out prashadam, I can't believe it, you know, just whatever it is. And actually the far out thing is the more we glorify the devotees, the more actually we get their mercy, and we actually start developing those qualities ourselves as well. So, yeah, just summing that answer up was, just read Chaitanya Charitamrita and just watch the devotees' dealings. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya and Swarup Damodar were present when Lord Chaitanya was glorifying Srila Rupa Goswami as if he had 5 mouths, like just directly like glorifying him. And Dave Marita Maharaj was saying that, you know, he's like testing his devotees. Are you guys going to get envious? And of course, they're, you know, pure devotees, so they're not. But it's just, just read Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's just such, the dealings of the devotees, you just basically see how they just glorify each other and how they're so happy to see each other make advancement. And that, reading Chaitanya Charitamrita, that will rub off on us. And we'll start developing that, man, yeah, I just want to glorify the devotees. You know, man, it's just so ecstatic just reading about it. Maybe I should apply it in my own life. Yeah. So that's the icing on the cake for that answer from Dave Marita Swami. Yeah. Is that okay? And sorry, Dave, I didn't finish up. That was okay? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Vagavan. Old habits die hard, as they say. So it's past 9 o'clock. I'm sure everyone's starving. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki, Jani Tagore Premanandi.